We're not going to have Bible class, really. We're going to take all the kids out of classes and have kind of scripture reading and song time, if you can make it and be here for those. And then coming in the new year for the first 2 quarters, Caleb's going to be in this class finishing up the Old Testament with post-exilic history. The books, Brent didn't teach the book of Esther before he left, right? I was trying to remember this. Anyway, Caleb's going to pick up in post-exilic history with possibly Esther, but definitely Ezra, Nehemiah, and then Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. So that'll be the first 2 quarters of next year in this class. And then, that'll lead us into the summer and into the end of the year. So it's kind of sad. This is our last poetry and wisdom class. We've been doing this for about a little more than a year now. And I've really, really enjoyed it. I hope it's been good for you all. I know we don't study these books super often, especially Song of Solomon. And so it's been really, it's been challenging for me, especially Song of Solomon has been a particularly kind of, involved book in studying and trying to teach it. But it's been insightful and helpful for me, and I hope and pray that it's been the same for all of you as well. So I appreciate your good attention and all the participation you've had in these classes. This is what's ahead of us tonight. It's a good chunk of the book. By the way, if you want one of these proposed chiastic structures, raise your hand. I can hand them out to you. But we're going to finish up in all these sections. So we're going to just get into it and work our way through it. I don't have any discussion questions on the PowerPoint tonight, but we're going to finish up hopefully when we get to the end with a few, I think, overarching ideas or meanings or ideas of why this book is so significant and what its significance is for us today. So we're going to do a little backtracking as we get into tonight. But last week we got through this section. This is the section where, starting in verse 2, right before this in verse 1 and into chapter 4 is when they got married and consummated their love. And then instantly she is having this kind of anxiety. We talked about that last week, so I'm not going to get into all that again. But the chorus of Jerusalem girls ask her in her kind of lovesick anxiety what she thinks of her beloved and where he is. And if you remember, she said, "My beloved's awesome. He's the best around. I love him, and he's right here with me." And so is this section, and that's this whole section here. You can see that the second question, where is your beloved gone? And she said, "My beloved's gone down to his garden, to the beds of balsam. I'm my beloved, and my beloved is mine." And so we looked at this language saying that it means he's with her right now. So it really is this kind of interesting kind of psychological insight into relationships and the ups and downs, is the losing and finding. Even when we're together sometimes, even when these two beloveds, these two lovers are together, there's still kind of mental, emotional things that can separate them. And so really, really, I think there's a lot of insight into these songs. But let's pick up here in chapter 6, verse 4. I know this is small. We're going to break up these sections into smaller sections on the next few slides. But again, the green is the man, the blue is the chorus, and the yellow is the woman. Now, this isn't biblically inspired color coding. We don't know who's speaking where. You have to a lot of people have a lot of different opinions. I just want to remind us of that. This is what I think makes sense. This will make sense to me. But we'll get into some stuff tonight near the end where it can be tough to tell who's singing what at what points. But let's get into this section. Chapter 6, verse 4 through the first half of verse 13, chapter 7. The man says to his beloved, "You are as beautiful as Tirzah, my darling, as lovely as Jerusalem, as awesome as an army with banners. Turn your eyes away from me, for they have confused me. Your hair is like a flock of goats that have descended from Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of ewes which have come up from their washing, all of which bear twins, and not one among them has lost her young. Your temples are like a slice of pomegranate behind your veil. There are 60 queens and 80 concubines and maidens without number. But my dove, my perfect one, is unique. She is her mother's only daughter. She is the pure child of the one who bore her. The maidens saw her and called her blessed. The queens and the concubines also, and they praised her, saying, 'Who is this that grows like the dawn, as beautiful as the full moon, as pure as the sun, as awesome as an army with banners?' I went down to the orchard of nut trees to see the blossoms of the valley, to see whether the vine had budded or the pomegranates had bloomed. Before I was aware, my soul set me over the chariots of my noble people. Come back, O Shulamite. Come back, that we may gaze at you." So immediately after that last section where the woman is kind of going through all these doubts and losing her beloved who's with her, he comes in and he just affirms how amazing he thinks she is. I mean, this is kind of the whole song, right? They both go back and forth. Mostly we get what the woman has to say, but there's a lot of back and forth between the two beloveds, what they think about each other, and it's always just poetic beauty, right? Tirzah and Jerusalem are the two biggest, most beautiful cities in all of the land, and so this idea is kind of this like amazing architecture. I mean, have you ever been to a city and just like a new city? It's just amazing. I don't know if you guys get romantic like that with cities, but it's like, it just feels like there's like an awe-inspiring kind of like, wow, look at all the work and the perfection. It's obviously not one-to-one, but these kind of like awe-inspiring pictures are supposed to be grandiose in how amazing and lovely she is. An army with banners, just things that are totally unique and different from anything else, I think is all this. Gets into verse 5 and says, turn your eyes away from me, they've confused me. And he goes into some of his tried and truths. He's already said these things about her. You know, she has all her teeth, her hair looks like goats skipping down the mountain. And this could give us a hitch, right? This could be confused. There are 60 queens and 80 concubines. One of the things I saw about this is they put this into score. There's 70 queens and 40 concubines. Kind of this idea where it's like in Proverbs we read there are 3 things I understand, yea, 4 that are amazing to me. It's a very kind of poetic wisdom way of just saying there's all these beautiful, amazing, regal, lovely women out there, but my dove, my perfect one is unique. So all this to say simply that he's enamored with her. He is besotted. He is smitten. All these, whatever words you can kind of come up with the poetic grandiosity of how he feels about her, he is totally just involved with her. And then the chorus comes in, it seems, and that's for the queens and the concubines and all the kind of women of Jerusalem. Who is this that grows like the dawn, as beautiful as the full moon, as pure as the sun, as awesome as an army with banners? If you remember all the way back to chapter 1, she was talking about her dark skin. She's like, I had to work in the vineyards. Don't look at my dark skin. She's like self-conscious before the Jerusalem girls. And now the Jerusalem girls are seeing how beautiful she is. You know, the whole book, it's interesting. The first half, and all the anticipation of the marriage and then the consummation of it even, there's all this anxiety and all this kind of like self-consciousness on the women's songs. And then after this, and once the man affirms her, the rest of this is just like she's totally confident. She's totally confident in who she is. She's totally confident in her love for her beloved. And the whole tone kind of shifts in the second half of this song to where after all this stuff that's been gone through, she is completely just, there's no concerns, no worries. She is in love. And it's just like, I think that's one of the arcs and the threads of this whole song. In the first half, when we're building up to the consummation, it's just like, wow, she's so kind of like in her head and self-conscious. And then we're going to see more and more as these sections go on. That all disappears, evaporates into the love she shares with her husband. And so this idea here is, again, I think it's her singing, and it's kind of, she's saying that she's like with the prince now. It's like all of a sudden, out of nowhere, she got married, and now she can't even, all of a sudden, one time she was a girl, and now she's married. She's like a prince, and she's beside herself. Among the chariots, a prince is with her. And it seems like here, all of the Jerusalem girls are calling to her, come back, come back. Shulamite has there's a lot of confusion about what it could mean, but I kind of think one that makes most sense to me is that they're kind of calling her the perfect one. Even the Jerusalem girls are just like saying, wow, like we want you back. Like it's pulling of her, the life she had and the life she has now. That's what I see going on in this song in verse 13. And so after like, it just, I think, we covered some of this last week, so I'm going through it quickly again tonight. But I just want to remind us where we are before we get into this section of the next verse. Any thoughts about this? Any ideas? Any questions? We covered some of this last week, and I went through it quickly tonight just to remind us and get us up to speed for tonight's sections. All right, let's keep moving. So then the man comes back in green. And he says, "Why?" I'll read all this. Why should you gaze at the Shulamite, as at the dance of the 2 companies? Chapter 7, verse 1, how beautiful are your feet in sandals, O prince's daughter. The curves of your hips are like jewels, the work of the hands of an artist. Your navel is like a round goblet which never lacks mixed wine. Your belly is like a heap of wheat fenced about with lilies. Your 2 breasts are like 2 fawns, twins of a gazelle. Your neck is like a tower of ivory. Your eyes are like the pools in Heshbon, by the gate of Beth Rabim. Your nose is like the tower of Lebanon, which faces toward Damascus. Your head crowns you like Carmel, and the flowing locks of your head are like purple threads. The king is captivated by your tresses. How beautiful and how delightful you are, my love, with all your charms. Your stature is like a palm tree, and your breasts are like its clusters. I said, I will climb the palm tree. I will take hold of its fruit stalks. Oh, may your breasts be like clusters of the vine, and the fragrance of your breath like apples, and your mouth like the best wine. It goes down smoothly for my beloved, flowing gently through the lips of those who fall asleep. I am my beloved's, and his desire is for me. Come, my beloved, let us go out into the country. Let us spend the night in the villages. Let us rise early and go to the vineyards. Let us see whether the vine is budded and its blossoms have opened, and whether the pomegranates have bloomed. There I will give you my love. The mandrakes have given forth fragrance, and over our doors are all choice fruits, both new and old, which I have saved up for you, my beloved. Oh, that you were like a brother to me who nursed at my mother's breasts. If I found you outdoors, I would kiss you. No one would despise me either. I would lead you and bring you into the house of my mother who used to instruct me. I would give you spiced wine to drink from the juice of my pomegranates. Let his left hand be under my head and his right hand embrace me. I want you to swear, O daughters of Jerusalem, do not arouse or awaken my love until she pleases. All right, there's some stuff in here that might sound, it's a lot of hard stuff, even this section. But I think with the interpretation we've done so far and where we're at in the song, I think we can kind of get the general idea, right? The man's description in green kind of goes from, the feet up. He starts at her feet and he goes all the way up her body and talks about how much he loves her and how again, enamored he is with her beauty. This word in your Bible in chapter 6, the end of chapter 6, what is that, verse 13, might have the Manaheim or two camps. It's really hard to know exactly the two companies. This word's found in Genesis of when Jacob splits his camp into two companies. And so we're just not sure. It's hard to figure out what's going on. To me, what makes sense is he says, why would you gaze at the perfect one as if she's a camp dancer? There's a lot going on that we just can't, it's hard to figure out. But it seems like, again, he's talking about her beauty. He's praising it again. And he goes on through this whole description. And I don't think this section is hard to understand what he's doing. I mean, maybe we wouldn't like our nose. Maybe you ladies wouldn't like your nose being compared to a tower. But, again, he's not saying that her nose is huge. What he's saying is every part of her is kind of grandiose and structured. And, he's in love with every bit of her. Even her nose is attractive to him, which I think is, no matter what you say, it's sweet and kind of funny, but he's just completely enamored. And so through this, it's not just an appreciation of her beauty, but it's also, you can see he's desirous to be with her again. And whereas before, in chapter 4, he had to kind of call her out of the mountains and she was far and hard to reach. And then when they do consummate, she then goes through this whole thing where she's lost again. This time, she interrupts him, it seems like. And she says, may the wine go straight to my lover, flowing gently over lips and teeth. And in verse 10, she says this, I am my beloved's and his desire is for me. This, I think, is a really big moment in the song where she's kind of she comes into her own and says, you know what? I'm in. There's nothing holding me back anymore. There's no concerns. I'm not one of the Jerusalem girls anymore. I'm not hanging out with my friends. I'm not a child anymore. Now I'm my beloved's. He desires me, and I'm all in. And I think because the song's been building up to this. This is why, even as it goes on, the end of this song, don't arouse or awaken love, this repeated refrain throughout the song, I think it's building up to this where now she's totally committed. There's no other concerns. Nothing else exists. It's just her and her beloved. And as she sings about this, she is just, again, reciprocating how besotted and in love he is. And she's just in love with the fact that he desires her even. And so she says, come, let's go. Let's go into the country, spend the night in the villages. It's just this idea of just exploring to the world together and being together, vineyards and gardens and all these vines and blossoms, and mandrakes specifically. They're all kind of euphemistic of love and love-making in the language of the song. We've seen this time and time again, time after time. And she says, there I'll give you my love. Again, when you see love in the Song of Songs, it really almost always, if not always, has the implication of love-making. That's how I understand it, at least, in my reading. The mandrakes have given forth fragrance, certainly here, by the way. It doesn't matter where else. This certainly is what's going on here. Over our doors are all choice fruits, both new and old, which I have saved up for you, my beloved. Again, don't awaken or arouse love until it pleases. She said, I'm all yours. Everything about me I've saved for you. Nothing about me has been for anybody else, but just for you. And so again, things like this we might step aside and say, well, yeah, so many relationships aren't like this, but this isn't saying this is the only way it can be, and if it's not like this, it'll never be enjoyable or never be right. what this is holding up is the ideal that God has for us. And when the song praises it such as this, it reminds us that there aren't just negative consequences to the brokenness of sexual sin and all this that can kind of get in and totally destroy us, but there is this holy, really, and positive motivation to avoid those things. And like Hebrews 13 says, keep the marriage bed pure. Because this kind of confidence and this kind of totally all in with nothing else existing is what God has saved within the bounds of marriage, and why he designed it for us and why it is perfect in its design. And appreciating the positive aspects of it, I think, are what this song is about. So we don't just have negative don'ts telling us how to act or behave. We have these kind of positive, beautiful, poetic songs saying this is why God built it this way. This is why he has these commands for us, because there is something so precious in it if it can be preserved. That's what I see in this section. Now, then it gets in this verse that is just like, totally breaks our, like, what's going on here? She's, I wish you were a brother to me who nursed my mother's breasts. It's kind of a weird line, right? But what I've read and what I think is probably going on here is it's almost like they're out in the villages, they're out and about, and she wishes that he were like her brother so that she could kiss him outdoors and no one would despise her. The idea, those second two lines are the idea. Not that she could kiss her brother like she kisses her lover, but the idea is if she was with her brother, she wouldn't have to be worried about what people think. There wouldn't be crossing of any lines. It's not the idea is that she could be affectionate with those who are close to her in public, her family, in ways that wouldn't be appropriate for her to be affectionate with even her husband in public. And this gets into kind of, I don't know, I guess the idea, maybe especially in this culture of PDA, like we talk about, and how it crosses lines. She's just kind of saying, I wish I could openly express my love to you at all times. I think that's the idea here. That's how I understand it, at least. And that helps us into the next verse. I don't think she's saying, I would lead you, like if he was her brother. I think it's just going on, saying, I will lead you and bring you into the house of my mother, who used to supposed to be gone. She who bore me, I would give you spiced wine to drink from the juice of my pomegranates. And again, I think this house of the mother has been talked about a few times, and it's also like the familial language is consistent and can still be striking and weird to us. But I think the idea here even could be like the house of, like it's connecting to the processes that this is referring to. Not to get too biological and scientific, but everyone has a mother. And everyone's born and conceived in a womb, and the process for that is exactly what this song is about. And so I think part of this house of my mother could be kind of, euphemistic sounds like bad, but it's a poetic way of saying, I'm leading you into me, and this is what we're engaging in. This is how we were born. It's connecting to the whole process of life and reproduction, if you want to put it scientifically. And then she gets into kind of the claims, the last, how she ends a lot of the songs. Let his left hand be under my head and his right hand embrace me. I want you to swear, O daughters of Jerusalem, do not arouse or awaken my love until she pleases. In some ways, this is like the culmination, the best expression of their love. And this final, there'll be closing verses, but this really, to me, is kind of the climactic conclusion of their love, where there's nothing holding them back from each other. There's nothing in the way. There's no anxieties. There's going to be no more seeking and finding in the rest of this book. It's just going to be them being together and being able to enjoy being together. So any comments or questions? I know I ran through that really quickly. That's what we have to do. Chase, go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned that this culture might have been against public affection, but I don't know, if the culture was normal to kind of talk like this to your beloved, is this a normal thing, or is this like Solomon? You normally go up to a woman and talk about her two fawns, or...
I think that's a great question. I think that's part of the reason this book is so hard to interpret, is because it makes us uncomfortable, right? Like, we don't talk like this, certainly not in Bible classes or in church very often. We don't talk about this in public. And yet, like, you go back as far in history as we can have people commenting on this, that was the question they had. Like, what do we do with this? Because I think there's an implication. You don't go up to someone and talk to them like this. But in the context of the whole song, you see them like, they're two people who are just in love with each other in the kind of most passionate, stage of a relationship. It's like the honeymoon phase of all honeymoon phases, where there's nothing else existing, right? And in that phase, these things are, I think, not just normal, but appropriate, right? That's what God designed love to be. And so I don't think they're going around in public saying this to each other. But this song, as we find it in the pages of the Bible, we have to wrestle with it. It's challenging, but I think the idea is it's holding up this ideal that God has, this jewel that God has placed within the confines of marriage, right?
It's a public song.
Yeah, it is a public song, right? But, you know, yeah, there's so many ways we can go around on, and I'm not belittling you what you're saying. I'm just saying, like, it is hard, right? But again, like, Proverbs talks about stuff like this in different language. You know, Ecclesiastes talks about this. And then throughout the Old Testament, we read in Genesis the story of Dinah, or the story of Judah and Tamar, or in 2 Samuel, the story of Amnon and his sister Tamar. Or there's all these negative stories we read in the pages of the Bible. We're like, this is horrible. Or in Judges. I mean, time would fail us to talk about how much God records how broken humans get in this arena of our lives. And the whole Old Testament, I think, will be really depressing in the sense of how there's no hope for the kind of ideals of sexual love that God placed within the bounds of marriage if this wasn't in the Old Testament. And it has to be as public as the sins and the brokenness are, or else it's out of balance. This is my opinion, okay? I don't need to defend God's canon, I don't think, but I do think that there has to be something you can look to, even as kind of, I think, this is an adult Bible class, and I think there are appropriate places and times to go through this book. But I do believe that it's just as important in the wisdom literature as stuff like Proverbs, which warns against the dangers of adultery and all that, so consistently. Does that make sense? Does that help? I don't know. It's challenging, right?
I was wondering if this was like normal poetry back in the day, or...
Oh, it certainly was. There was poetry like this all over the ancient Near East.
But no PA.
No PDA.
You can speak like this, that's fine, but no...
What I'm saying is I don't think like...
No penting any smoochies.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to know exactly the place this had in their culture. This is part of the reason there's so many interpretations of this. Think about the place this has in our culture, And yet how openly the world at large will talk about things, or how accessible so many things are, like pornography and such. Like there is a culture at large in the world that exists, and there is a culture among God's people that exists. And even within both those cultures, we have to really try and assess what is holy and what is good and what isn't. And that makes assessing songs like this very challenging, because it might cross some of our lines. We have to assess, well, is that a line I should have? Or how do I define this? I'm not trying to define that for you. I'm just saying this is challenging. Ricky?
I think you said it earlier. God designed the marriage. He designed his people to be with, when they know God, to keep it's perfect, it's good. There's nothing wrong with it. We can it implies that when you do it God's way, ain't nothing like it.
Yeah.
There's nothing like a marriage that's godly. That two people that are, in love, not only with themselves, but with God first.
Yes.
That
the triangle. Yeah. Yes.
It's when it's connected, when it's tied. And when you go beyond God's message in any way, from love to your everyday stuff, He's covered it all.
Yeah.
When we, you can get into the poetry and you can read all of this, you all, but at the end of the day, where the rubber meets the road, is God has a plan in every aspect of our lives. And until you find someone that knows God's ways, that's the key. And don't have 700 concubines and 800 wives like Solomon did.
Yes.
Trying to make ties with those peoples around that didn't know the honest, the true God.
Yeah, the world at large.
Yeah, and when you bring all that other stuff, that's when things go south.
Yeah.
That's when things go south.
Yeah, which is it's the baseline for life in this world, right?
That's the baseline for everything. If you follow God's plan and until they die or you die or whatever, it's a beautiful thing.
Yes.
And everything that is described, it's take it from somebody that had, and those that are married, they understand.
Yeah.
And those that are seeking to be married, understand what it's saying.
Yeah.
God has a plan for you. Stay within those boundaries, and you're going to have a great life.
Yeah.
Not a okay life. I mean a great life.
Yes. Amen.
The man, you're going to be a better person, and the woman is already designed to be awesome, right?
Yeah.
So the man is going to become a better man.
I think we see the woman becoming better in this song even too, right?
She's already. I mean, she's designed. For,
I get your point.
She's designed for awesome.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just telling
I got you.
If the ladies put the plug in the ear, but I'm talking to the guys right now.
I got you.
Yeah.
So
God's plan is spot on.
It's beautiful, yeah.
Spot on.
And I think that's what this song is highlighting. So I don't know. I can't speak to all the cultures we have. I do think the Christian culture that we've inherited in the U.S. has some Victorian, puritanical levels of prudishness that isn't always helpful to us. But nonetheless, we can't pendulum swing the other way and talk about these things all the time in inappropriate ways either. But the fact that this song exists and where it exists and how it exists in its fullness, I think, expresses something that we ought to be able to be more comfortable with and think through more consciously without having to imply, without having to wonder. I think that's what this song's here for. That's my understanding. Let's go look at these last verses of the song, right? So beginning on verse 5, it says, "Who is this coming up from the wilderness, leaning on her beloved? Beneath the apple tree, I awakened you. There your mother was in labor with you. There she was in labor, and you gave you birth. Put me like a seal over your heart, like a seal on your arm. For love is as strong as death. Jealousy is as severe as Sheol. Its flashes are flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. Many waters cannot quench love, nor will rivers overflow it. If a man were to give all the riches of his house for love, it would be utterly despised. We have a little sister, and she has no breasts. What shall we do for our sister on the day when she is spoken for? If she is a wall, we will build on her a battlement of silver. But if she is a door, we will barricade her with planks of cedar. I was a wall, and my breasts were like towers. Then I became in his eyes as one who finds peace." Solomon had a vineyard at Baal-Hamon. He entrusted the vineyard to caretakers. Each one was to bring 1,000 shekels of silver for its fruit. My very own vineyard is at my disposal. The 1,000 shekels are for you, Solomon, and 200 are for those who take care of its fruit. O you who sit in the gardens, my companions are listening for your voice. Let me hear it. Hurry, my beloved, and be like a gazelle or a young stag on the mountains of spices. All right, I think this is the breakdown of who's singing here. Again, there's some things in here that are challenging, but I think as you get into verse 5, it's the chorus, and most of this is the woman, then the man speaks for a little bit, and then the woman finishes it out. This chorus line, it's identical. The beginning of this verse is identical to the beginning of chapter 3, verse 6. But now, instead of the focus being on the man coming in his marriage procession, the focus is on the woman. Again, I think this fits into the theme of the whole kind of song, the movement of the song, moving towards focusing in on the woman through her story and through her kind of this rite of passage and this rite of this moment of becoming, a married woman, just like through this all. So, So this language, beneath the apple tree, I awakened you, or it could be I aroused you. There your mother, shouldn't be there. There your mother conceived you. There she was in labor and gave you birth. I think that's kind of the idea here. He's called an apple tree earlier in chapter 2, verse 3. And again, that house of the mother idea, I think, is speaking of the womb. I think, again, she's just connecting to, now that she's engaged in this relationship, she's understanding and realizing, she's a part of the greater kind of cycle of humanity. I mean, that's too grandiose, but I think this song is about the grandiosity of love and what its place in life. And I think she's kind of engaging with that. As weird as this language might be to us, I think that's how she's engaging with it. And then I think the most this is the most significant verses from the whole song. This is like a climactic conclusion of the song. Put me like a seal over your heart. Love is eternal, right? These aren't sea lions. These are seals. These are signet rings. They are locked in. They are laminated. It's the idea is this is forever. The love is eternal and transcendent. But even in that, this idea of love is as strong as death comes up, and it's almost jarring to hear all this like beauty of love and how great it is, and then say it's as strong as death. So I think the idea is a couple of things. Even in their love, they're mindful it's not going to be forever. Like you alluded to, Ricky, or said it a little earlier, that you love each other as long as you're both around, and then you lose each other for the last time. And here I think it's even, but in the sense of how irresistible, how true and irresistible death is, how certain it is, that's how irresistible and strong love is, which is fascinating. That's a really kind of meditative question and comment to ponder. The idea here it might be interpreted jealousy, I think, also could be passion. Passion is as fierce as the grave, and the idea isn't necessarily even like the sexual passion, but rather it's just passion of how much it's emotional attachment. It's possessive and exclusive. This is how God speaks about his people throughout the Old Testament, throughout all of the Bible, that he is jealous of the spirit he's placed within us, like James 4 says. This idea is that we ought to feel about our spouse this way, that it's just, they are mine and mine alone, and I am theirs and theirs alone. There is a possessiveness to it. Sometimes in our culture today, we, at large, people can kind of chide this idea or belittle it. And there can be negative aspects to it, but really in love's truest expressions, we ought to be possessive of each other and be totally given to each other at the same time. So I think this is really the conclusion of the song. And then this is my understanding, all right? People, these last few verses are kind of puzzling to some extent, but I think as she goes into this, take us back to chapter 1 where she was like forced to be out in the vineyard and she got all sunburnt and she didn't want anybody to look at her. I think this is she's looking back at a time where, as she reflects on all of it, she kind of reflects maybe, I think this is, again, these are hard verses for me to totally understand, but I think she's kind of reflecting on what this was like. There was a time where she was not at her own she couldn't do what she wanted. She couldn't be who she wanted to be. She was spoken for, she was protected, and all these things, and her brothers made sure that she stayed pure, and they were kind of like controlling her, chasing boys off. Maybe, I don't know what the idea is specifically, but that's kind of the, I think, general perspective here. And then in verse 10, she comes in and says, using the same language her brothers used at first, she says, I was a wall, and my breasts were like towers. Then I became in his eyes as one who finds peace. I think this is kind of looking back and saying, look how far I've come. This is where I was. This is where things started. But now the same language is used, but now I'm mature. Now I'm married. Now I'm a woman with my man. And I think that's kind of, again, it's maybe odd, but this is, I think, it seems like a reflection. And then I think with all the Solomon language and all kind of Solomonic references, there is an irony, or there is a kind of a wisdom bit about this. And the fact that this is written for Solomon or by Solomon or in Solomon's time and in Solomon's court, I think there's something here that is pointed, in a sense, that Solomon can have all these men taking care of his vineyards, and he can spend all these money on 1,000 shekels. He had 1,000 women in between his wives and his harem. But the idea is that her own vineyard is at her disposal. He might have all this, but even his caretakers are taking bits of it. It's almost like he has all these amazing things and so much, and yet he doesn't even really appreciate it. He doesn't even get to enjoy it. But in the sense of this, she's saying, I don't need all the grandiosity. I don't need all that. I have my vineyard. My own very own vineyard's at my disposal. You can have yours. I have what I want. And I think the idea here is, as she reflects, she's not just reflecting on how things used to be. She's also reflecting on her and her beloved in the kind of scope of love in general, maybe, or Solomon's definition, or the king's definition of love at the time, and how she's like, you know what? I'm totally content with what we have. The idea, it even kind of conflicts with verse 7, where she talks about, if you already have read all the riches of your house for love, you'd be utterly despised. There's kind of this, maybe a criticism or just a holding up of the place of love, in contrast with some of the examples of the day. And then the man comes in at the end and he says, oh, you who sit in the garden, companions are listening for your voice, let me hear it. And it's like at the end of this all, at the beginning she was self-conscious and out of focus, but now him and his friends, she's in his world and they all are listening to her. They want to hear her. He wants to hear her voice. He appreciates everything about her. And then she says, "Hurry, my beloved, be like a gazelle or a young stag on the mountains of spices." And she's inviting him again to enjoy their relationship. And that's how the song ends. It just ends on this invitation from her to her beloved, but there's nothing holding them back, nothing in the way. And the song ends on this kind of open-ended, we would put in probably "and they lived happily ever after" is how we would end this song. But that's kind of the open-ended ending of the song. Again, there's some confusing things in here. This is my best effort to understand these last section, but I do believe, nonetheless, we understand the overarching ideas and points going on in this whole song. So, anything about this? Any comments? I have a few things. We only have 5 minutes left. I have a few things I want to cover before we finish. But if there are any questions, I don't want to overlook those. All right. Here's some reasons why I think this book might be in here. I already referenced some of them or spoke to some of them. But first of all, the passion and purity of marital love is improved by not awakening love until it pleases. The first two kind of sections of the song are all about anticipation, losing and finding, seeking your beloved, and kind of waiting for them and engaging in the ways that are best, right, correct. And so I think one of the major themes of this song is that with this, don't awaken love until it pleases, is this idea that there is a way to engage in this that will bring so much pure joy with nothing else intruding upon it. And this is the beauty and design God has for us. I think what's interesting is sometimes Christians growing up in a culture that is so inundated with sexuality being front and center, and comments being, so disparaging of monogamous, heterosexual love sometimes, that it stands out to me that in the middle of the Old Testament, God says, it's awesome. This is what I designed it for. And this song is written to say, there's no shame in we ought to actually celebrate the beauty of what God has designed for us in marriage. Especially, maybe this stands out especially in a culture where that's not the prevailing view of godly marriage. Secondly, God designed the sexual relationship in marriage to be vibrant and to be enjoyed. Look at 1 Corinthians 7, 3-5, where it talks about the husband belongs to his wife and the wife to her husband, to render to each other. These ideas ought to be remembered. Sometimes, I think the losing and finding themes of the song even get to this idea that this ought to be something. Maybe there are times where there are ebbs and flows to our relationship, but there ought to be a mind that we have about our marriage that we only have so long with our spouse, and we ought to engage in this. This ideal brings up how this ought to be something that is significant to us, a gift that we give each other, and something that the spouses love to engage in for each other, vibrant and enjoyed. That's what this song, the notes this song brings to my mind as I read it. Again, that can stand opposed to some Christian cultures, and I don't think, not necessarily. I'm not going to speak to whose it is, but I think sometimes there can be extreme ideas that sex is only for procreation, to whatever runs the gamut, right? But here in this song, we see that there is something beautiful and vibrant and enjoyable about it that is just what it is. And God made it that way, and so we shouldn't be insecure about that. And then I think I put this as very, very vague in general, but this is one thing that struck me in reading and studying this book. I've said it so much, but I think it has so many applications that we ought to understand that there is times where we are more distant or things that feel lost, especially in the anticipation of the relationship, but even in the enjoyment of the relationship. Throughout time, it's defined by periods of losing and finding, and whether or not we're literally apart from our spouses. In the song, they were literally together, and she still kind of got lost from him in her mind and in her emotions. And I think this defines a reality within relationships that we ought to be mindful of. And the idea is that you can come back together, and there is seeking, and there is kind of anticipation built in, even into the marriage, which is the anticipation pre-marriage and pre-consummation of love is so beautiful in its own way and exciting. And in a sense, the song almost redefines those times where we are separated from each other as all the more beautiful when you are brought back together. And I think that's again, these are ideals. They're kind of corny, maybe if you say them, but I think there's also so much beauty in that and how we view our relationship. And the bespeckled kind of, ebbs and flows, highs and lows of it make it all the more beautiful in its totality. To me, that's what the song really defines. And then finally, most importantly, love is transcendent. And Jesus Christ loves his church like a husband loves his wife. Go back and read this again. You know, a lot of people only see it this way. They allegorize it or make this whole thing a type. But I don't think it's the primary interpretation of Song of Solomon, but I think we would be foolish to miss out on the fact that, especially as Ephesians 5 points out, that Christ loves us like a husband loves his wife. And if this book points out the joy and the absolute just over the moon, like just emotion the husband has for his wife and the wife has for her husband, then we get a little insight into how Jesus Christ views us. And I think this undoes a lot of the bad thinking, stinking thinking, as Brent would say, that Christians have about how God views us. We can view God as overly judgmental. I mean, he's going to bring judgment, but we view him as only judgmental and kind of always catching us when we're wrong, just this kind of cosmic punisher. And yet, so many of the pictures God says, this is how I feel about you. He says, no, I almost can't look at you. I love you so much. And the song, while it's not primarily about that, I think that is one of the true messages and themes of the Song of Songs, is that it articulates the beauty that God has in love for us in a way to show us, this is how I feel about you. And that ought to confuse us and make us wonder in the right ways, and ought to bring all this kind of prayerful joy and gratitude that God loves in that way for us. To me, that's one of the most beautiful things about this song. The middle school kids love ringing that bell, man. So this to me is the things we got to see in this. I would say read the whole song again and look for these things and pray about these things, how they apply to you right now, whether you're married or not. Even this idea of losing and finding, and there's going to be a time where while we're together and living, these things are true, but then there'll be a time where we lose our spouse for the last time. And that's, I think, in a sense, like the song even kind of prepares and articulates how the relationship up to then engages with that idea too. There's so much in here that I think is profound for what love is to us, that I would encourage us all to read this whole song again, not to feel weird about it, but just get the whole message and to pray about these things and see how it applies to me and my life today, because God wants us to have this kind of love in our lives. So that's my hope for all of us with this book, and I'm really glad we studied it. So one last thing, I enjoy the role reversal. You know, being a kid, you get these conversations from older people. You're like, I really don't want to be in this conversation. The number of times I stood up here and asked you guys questions and saw you all blank-faced, sheet white faces stare at me and not want to say anything was just tasty. I really enjoyed that. So that was for me.